So up until now, you've been doing work around familiarizing yourself with the different types of assessments and resources available to you as an instructional coach, school leader, teacher, and really been thinking about kind of those initial steps in the process of being data wise, right? And so what I wanted to do is end this week by just kind of taking you through the whole cycle of being data wise. As I said before, this isn't an exact, kind of lockstep approach, but I thought I would give you an example of, one, especially since previously we talked about, some of the Keystone literature, using that as an example then to kind of think about what this would look like in a school. So, step one, we know that the purpose of this step is to really establish those structures and teams, and we talked about that, previously, and the things that you want to be thinking about. And so that's where you're going to want to be organizing, school-wide meeting agenda templates, right? So whether you're working as a large group, or you're working at grade level teams or department teams, or perhaps cross discipline area teams, that there's some type of process that's being utilized that everyone's kind of on the same page. And again, that idea of having norms is going to be really important at this step, and especially if you want to be collaborative. Um, Step two, you do really need to be thinking about where is your school in relation to being comfortable with the assessment? Is it something that they're just used to being given, or do they need some professional development on how to best interpret that? And so, hopefully, when you start looking at the assessment literacy in part five and some of the work we're going to do in part two or week two, you'll start having the tools to help teach in that I do, we do, you do for the adults. How do they make sense of that information along the way? And it may need to be something more I do at first, or greater emphasis on we do, or perhaps you're ready to get teachers, off and running on their own. Step three, and this is where we're going to want to start thinking about, we've looked at the data, we've started to make some interpretations of the results, and you're going to want to be thinking about creating a priority question, right? And so if you've had a chance to look at any of the released items, you'll know that in ELA, and it looks a little different depending on the level, but it does start like in third grade with main idea, but they start looking for what's the best theme in the literature. And so that's a question that when we looked at the results that I shared with you previously, that our students really seem to struggle with. And so, looking then at how do students approach finding the best theme in literature? What does that look like in the classroom? What are our students experiencing in order to be able to then provide or develop some type of action plan? So we know that we need to dig into the data, right, and find out, are students thinking more along character traits? Are they, maybe not looking as deep into the meaning or the lessons learned by the character? So we want to think about what's the learner-centered problem, and it's not about the students don't care, and it's not about no, they're not doing X at home. It's about what's going on in front of us that we can kind of begin to address. So I may need to look at some other sources of evidence to be able to get at that. I may need to look at their essays to figure out where our students typically, missing out on, coming up or identifying the best theme. And so that, of course, then takes us into step five, which is really thinking about problems of practice. So, how do we teach it? Are we kind of spoon feeding the answer to them versus, getting the students to struggle a little bit more to make connections with the characters to really think about what might actually be going on in the text? And as teachers, we often want their kids to be successful, and they're really good at scaffolding. And so sometimes we scaffold too much, And that perhaps could be a problem of practice in this case. Um, we think about then, we know that that's the problem of practice. We've identified our question. So then, it's picking a strategy that we're all going to emphasize for a period of time to work on in our classroom. Now, the caution here is that sometimes we all use terms like close reading, but if you were to ask everyone to define what that looks like, would they all answer in a similar way? And so, of course, when you are talking about close something like instructional strategy, you want to make sure that everyone has the same idea of what that looks like. And so, I have often, I've run PD sessions where I actually walk them through the example of what I would expect to see. And then that way, that kind of, instead of telling them what they should do, they have the experience of doing the strategy themselves and how that may relate to what they currently thought of it or previously thought and what they now think about it in terms of everyone in the room having the same concept of what this strategy looks like in action. So, of course, you then, of course, once you establish those consistent practices, you really want to think about going into this with a plan to assess. You don't want to come up with that after the fact. So, we know the long term is going to be either PSSA or Keystones, right? We might have teacher designed written responses as, kind of a midterm check. So, not midterm meaning exam semester, meaning at benchmark times, teachers are going to give their students a, written response or a multiple choice question related to a reading passage where they're going to be able to demonstrate their performance and growth in determining the best theme. And then of course there's short term, really those maybe some in-class discussions or bell ringer questions that you ask on a daily or weekly basis that tells you how your students are progressing along the way. And then of course step 8, we want to be noting improvement. You want to be observing who isn't on this, who in your class is not at the level of depth needed for that, and then how can you, as teachers, adjust, to emphasize their performance on that, goal that you have for them. Of course, state tests will indicate improvement, but one of the things that I don't feel is part of this book, which I feel should be part of this book, is this idea of celebrating successes. And so, the teacher saying, okay, 75% of my class got this, and great. So now how can we use that to help the other 25? What did you do with the 75 that that worked, and could you revisit that? Or, you know, something as simple as a bell ringer they really got today, and that on a frequent basis we want to be pausing, reflecting, and celebrating what's working, and so that we can feel positive and good about the work that they're doing. Right, success breeds success, and that's going to be an important step in this process. So for the conclusion for part 4 is, really reflecting on the things that we've done, in this week. We've talked about the different types of data collection going on in your school. You've started thinking about your school and the structures that exist with the different kinds of assessments and your assessment inventories. And then now want you to think about those implications for planning, instruction, interpreting data, and communicating your results. And I would kind of push you here to don't think about these questions in relation to your own classroom. Try to think about it, in terms of grade levels and departments and schools, and how could your school really strengthen that, right? So just kind of a post a discussion that really addresses these things based on your own context and based on what we've been doing all week. If you can post your initial response by Saturday, June 3rd, that would be really great, because then that would open up 2 days then for, kind of responding. If that doesn't work, don't worry about it. This is just trying to, get us moving. As I said earlier, we're in a 5-week schedule, and kind of keeping pace is going to be more important than being perfect in all your responses. So this is about a way for you to start demonstrating your thinking. I can read and start thinking about what it is you're getting out of the content, so that I can continue to guide the process. So this concludes part 4, and you'll want to move on after the discussion to assessment literacy, and then that would end week 1.